to start recording. And welcome everybody to the Contemporary Issues class. Nice to see you all here. We have 22 so far, and we will have more folks coming in. We are recording this with our speaker's permission for future posterity and replays. So we are happy today to have Harvey Martz back again with us to talk about principles we can agree on. We had a great discussion last week about the first 5 principles, and today we're going to talk about the second 5 in this group of 10. But first, want to do my usual announcements on things, to ask everybody to mute themselves in the lower left corner of your screen. Click on the mute button so that we don't hear additional background noise. And when you speak, go ahead and unmute yourself then. And also, usual request to not speak so frequently that you dominate the discussion today. We'll have lots of good discussion. And also, please don't challenge the speaker or other folks in a way that would make them feel uncomfortable. Just be kind as usual. Yeah. So with any announcements, first announcements, how'd everybody like the sermon today by Rev Lauren? I thought she did a good job. I always love it when we talk about the Wesley quadrilateral. I just think it's a wonderful way to examine the scriptures and our theological positions. So I was glad to see her talk about that. Any other things we want to discuss today before Harvey talks to us about the principles? Well, welcome to new folks who are on this Zoom call for the first time. We're glad to have you here. And Harvey, let's talk about the principles. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be with the whole group again. We had a great time last week, and Steve has just been a joy to work with and getting out documents to people. I hope you have had a chance to look those over either last week or sometime in the past few days, or even this morning. The 10 principles that can unify us, it's really a hypothesis about whether they do or not, and we're discussing that. We said last week, my assumption is that we're doing this discussion from a biblical and theological point of view. We're not just offering our unreflected upon opinions without considering scripture or theology. I have a favorite quote that's attributed to C.S. Lewis, 20th century theologian and author of several books, who said something like this: most of us form our political opinions and then look back to the Bible for support. Instead, we need to first look at scripture for our foundations and our values, and then let those values inform our politics. I said last week that there is a bias in the Bible toward the least and the last, and the left out and the vulnerable. All you have to do is read through some of the prophets, starting with the prophet Amos for that. Some values and principles in scripture that are important to me are Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to practice loving kindness, and to walk humbly with God? And the word justice in the Bible is a very rich and loaded word that means everybody gets treated fairly, everybody gets included and cared for. Matthew 25:31 through 46, when you've done it to the least of these, the neediest of these, you've done it to me. And then Jesus' admonition that we are to be compassionate. And embedded in scripture is the notion that we are not individualists. We are looking for the common good. The Constitution preamble even refers to that. So we got through the first 5 of the 10 principles. Again, the hypothesis that these may be values and principles that most Americans can agree on. And I thought we had a really good discussion. Judy was recording the number of people who contributed and who spoke. There were 20 people who contributed last week to the discussion. So we're going to hope for that, or even better participation today. I'm going to ask you to speak, to tell us your name before you choose to speak. And we're going to look at principles 6 through 10. And I think Steve's able to post those on the screen for us if he hasn't yet. And then I'm going to wonder if there are not some additions that we might want to make. Steve and I have talked about that. So if you'll respond in a moment, give us your name, and then I think we're going to borrow a practice from one of my theological mentors, Marcus Borg, professor of theology and Bible at Oregon State University, and ask for an alternation between male and female speakers, because sometimes one of those genders, you'll know which one, can dominate the discussion. So if we'll try alternating between a male and female contributor. So principle number 6, as a hypothesis, America should be a positive example to the rest of the world. And when international cooperation is necessary to solve global problems, our country should lead. What do you think about that? Agree or disagree? And we're not talking about strategies yet. We got into strategies a little too quickly last week. Is that a value that America's example and leadership should be foremost? Who wants to contribute?
Well, this is Susan.
Harvey, excuse me, Gene Dawson. What do you mean by leadership? Would you define that just a bit more?
America should be a positive example to the rest of the world. When international cooperation is necessary to solve global problems, our country should lead. Should not wait for other countries to set the example.
By virtue of financial support, technological wisdom, shared, but certainly in the driver's seat, pretty much.
Any proposal to solve global problems?
Okay.
What should America's position be? In the forefront, setting an example, or waiting for other people to set the example?
Well, so this is Susan Sutton, and the point that I was going to make that maybe ties into the last question was that I think that there's a thin line between what's considered leadership and hegemony. And of course, I think the latter is, the former is preferable. It's just a matter of process. And so leadership can be leading from behind in some ways.
And hegemony would mean being too dominant and not regarding the needs of other nations.
Yeah.
A male contributor?
Well, I'll jump in, Harvey. I think this brings up the whole issue of social isolation today. In our recent elections, we've had politicians that say we should pull back from being the policeman of the world and funding everything that goes on to try and help people in the world, and we should just take care of America first and let everybody else take care of themselves. So I think this kind of addresses that, and I'm for a balance of us leading in many cases, but also being able to pull back and decide when to leave things alone and encourage other countries to figure out their own problems to some degree.
Thank you. A female contributor?
This is Linda Daniel. I think when we're talking about leadership, the leadership should come through example that others can pick up or not pick up.
Thank you. A male contributor?
Harvey, Keith Galloway here. Can you hear me?
Yes, good to see you.
Okay, good to see you. Leadership is so important from our country, but I think we need to understand that leadership includes inclusion and cooperation. And that's the real key ingredient internationally and globally. There are so many wonderful cultures and civilizations throughout the world. And to exclude them or to not include them in the thought process just seems to me to not be the right kind of leadership.
Thank you, Keith. We're having a good discussion. Female contributor?
Yes, it's Linda Harmon. I think we need to be a part of the world and a part of the answer, but I think we need to be careful about not coming across as arrogant and having all the answers.
These are very nuanced evaluations. I appreciate it. A male contributor?
Yes, this is Tom Reiners here.
Hi, Tom.
And hi. And I think the sermon topic today, to be able to discern the wisdom of when we should be involved and when we should not be involved, is extremely apropos in this discussion.
Thank you. Female contributor?
This is Kathy Kilmer. And a couple of years ago, I would have readily agreed with this principle, but lately I've really been rethinking the so-called exceptionalism of our country. And so I might not agree with this principle. I do agree with what's been said so far, that we need to be wise in the kind of wisdom in the kind of leadership we show, and that we are listening and respectful of other nations. But I'm not convinced that our country has all the answers and would necessarily be the best country to lead. Thank you.
I'm really impressed with the subtlety and the nuances of your insights about this. One more contribution on this one, and then we'll move on to number 7. Okay. Number 7 is a hypothesis. Every American should be encouraged to vote, and all votes should be counted equally. What do you think?
I think that's Linda Harmon. I think that's true. I am questioning the equality. How do you cast a vote and have your vote not be counted equally?
Well, we might want to add some content to that statement. How easy should it be for Americans to vote?
This is Steve Harvey. I'll jump in, and I was assuming that this kind of gets at the whole electoral college versus the one-person vote issue. Obviously, in the last elections, that the person who got the majority vote Hillary Clinton did not end up being president because Trump got the electoral college vote, which addresses the whole issue of we don't have every person with the equal vote weight in America because of the electoral college. And so a lot of folks, and I think probably me too, have come around to the thought that we should have the majority vote electing our president instead of the electoral college system. So
Okay.
I think that's kind of at the root of this whole vote issue today.
Thank you, Steve. There's several levels to this statement, it sounds like. Is there a female contributor?
Hi, this is Alice Punin, and wait a minute.
We can hear you.
Okay. I believe in this country, everybody should be able to vote without feeling, I'll say, threatened or the fact that they're going to get sick. The mail-in ballot here in Colorado has worked wonderfully, and I believe it should be national.
Thank you. A male contributor?
This is Ron Puning, and
Hey,
I
Ron.
want to point out the United States Senate, the most 9 populous states have 50% of the population. They only have 18 of the 100 senators. So there's an incredible disparity in the US Senate between the one man, one vote principle and reality. Again, 50% of the US population has 18 senators. We could go into American history with the slaves counted as 3/5 of a person back in the early 1800s. But the very fact that you can tip the Senate so easily towards the minority rule is very unfortunate.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for those statistics. A female contributor? How easy should it be to vote? Is it okay to not have early voting or have early voting? Is it okay to expect people to wait in line for 3 or 4 or 5 or many more hours, which it seems to me has happened in our country? How accessible should the voting process be? And what does our theology and our scriptural values say about that? Anybody?
This is Linda. It should absolutely be easy and onto the least of these. Everyone should have an opportunity to express an opinion through their vote, and they should not be discouraged by fear or, in this case, sickness, or standing in line for 7 hours in 100-degree heat.
As most of you know, this is a hot current topic in American legislature when a reaffirmation of a kind of Voting Rights Act is on the table in Congress, isn't it?
This is Terry. I'd like to comment just slightly on that. Right now, all the 50 states can have their own rules. And I don't think the Congress would ever take away each state for setting up their own rules. One example in Pennsylvania, they're only allowed to vote on the day of the election.
Thank you. Anyone else on principle or hypothesis number 7?
Yes, hi, Harvey, this is Cynthia Reiners.
Cynthia?
We also need to consider the effect of extreme gerrymandering, which creates safe districts. You can do a creation of districts as a strictly mathematical formula, as opposed to whoever happens to be in control of the legislature at the time. And it means that if you live in a segregated area against your desire, all of your votes get concentrated in one place, and the opportunity for non-traditional candidates to run in more races
is greatly limited.
Thank you. There are lots of
Harvey,
complications in this one that I hadn't seen ahead of time. Bravo.
Harvey, just one little news angle to this that I noticed the last few days. Political analysts are saying that because more states right now are dealing with the COVID situation, they're switching to mail-in ballots. They're setting up their systems to do that where they've never done that before, that it is going to result in confusion and delays, so that November 3rd, we're not going to know that night who won the election. It's going to be days after that.
Yes.
And of course, the loser is probably going to appeal to the Supreme Court, and that's going to take time for a decision there. So this is going to be another nutty thing in this year that is going to result in the whole voting situation being delayed for days or weeks after the November 3rd election.
Thank you, Steve. What should be our goal in the amount of confidence that American citizens have about the voting process and confidence in the results? What's our goal? That we not have any doubts about the legitimacy of an election and about the manner in which it was handled and in the manner in which the votes were counted? Would that be a goal?
This is Sharon Burbank. And the way that it was handled with all this spyware and all that, everything is slanted. So you really don't know who's voting and who's really participating with their active mind as opposed to just letting the population run it. So I don't think that's good. I don't know how to fix it, but it's a problem.
Most of us on the call have lived a pretty long time. Do we remember any time when voting results seemed to be as questionable as they are now, or processes?
Just the announcement, Harvey, between Dewey and Truman, wasn't it? The headline.
Tell us about that for those who don't remember the history.
Oh, now let's see. It was Dewey and Truman, wasn't it, Harvey?
Yes.
They announced early on that Dewey won the election. That was the headline. The headlines. And then,
exactly.
Lo and behold, later in the day, it was reversed. Truman, the man who said the buck stops at the kitchen, emerged as president.
Well, and there are pictures that you can find pretty easily online of Truman holding up the newspaper that says Dewey won.
This is Terry. There was another close one in my lifetime, and that's when Jack Kennedy won the election, and it all came down to how the Illinois vote turned out.
Yep. Do you remember Jack Kennedy joking in a speech before the election, telling his father not to buy any more votes than were necessary? I'm not advocating the correctness of that or not. That's just a historical tidbit. Well, let's look at number 8. All Americans should be, this is a long one, equal before the law, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, income, religion, or any other characteristic that isn't relevant to the purposes of the law. All citizens should be treated with equal respect by law enforcement. It's a good thing we're not arguing about that today, isn't it? That's a satire. What do you think?
I think that's the ideal.
Okay. Tell us your name.
Linda Harmon.
Yes. Is there a male opinion? Not much disagreement about it?
Harvey, this is Steve. I think it's interesting you put in the word income there because, of course, the discussions today about income equality disparity. Brings up lots of good angles to this.
Thank you. Other comments, particularly from female contributors?
Yes, Harvey, this is Cynthia Reiners again.
Yes.
I think that the ideal and the reality is being tested very much in the Me Too movement,
Yes.
where the question of always believing what a victim of any kind of abuse says versus due process of the accused. And that has troubled me quite a bit. Although I don't necessarily disbelieve the victims, but due process is hard to manage in this situation.
Okay. Thank you. Someone else? Is number 8 a correct goal and value for America to have?
This is Ron Puning. Absolutely, it's a good goal. Of course, one of the most egregious violations of this precept was the pardon of Roger Stone.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So, yes.
Yeah, this is Judy Hoff. Do the dreamers or the non-citizens come into this?
What do you think?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking everybody.
What rights should adults in America who are undocumented and who were brought to the country when they were infants or children, what rights should they have?
This is Linda Harmon. I think they should have a fairly simple path to citizenship.
And how simple is our path to citizenship right now? Do you know? Not just Linda.
Pretty much non-existent.
It's pretty complicated. From what I read, others may be more knowledgeable.
I know I'm jumping in out of context here. My brother-in-law is a Swiss, and when he and my sister got married, they moved to the U.S. It took him 7 years to become a U.S. citizen. So even for somebody from a country such as Switzerland, it's a long, drawn-out process. I mean, he did it, but it's really hard.
I mentioned last week one of my predispositions. I have a predisposition toward the health of the safety net, the strength of the safety net in America for vulnerable people. But I have a predisposition because Evangeline and my father was a Greek immigrant in 1921. And I said, I'm looking right behind my laptop here at the ship's manifest that lists the name of Costa Marzoukos coming from Greece in April of 1921. So I have a warm place in my heart for people who, well, how many of us are the descendants of immigrants? Gee, we might need to go back a ways, but I think immigration is a pretty good thing overall.
This is Sharon Burbank, and I have a friend who continues to renew her green card because she says it's way too expensive to get citizenship. So if you're one of those dreamer children, where are you going to get the money to get your citizenship? To go through that process.
Anybody know the position, the opinion of Stephen Miller in the current administration about how open we should be to immigration in America? Who knows?
Terrible, awful, not let anybody in.
Well, and this is Susan Sutton. An extension of that is the discussion around the census. And so in addition to not having equal rights before the law, I mean, people aren't even being counted, yet they're taxpayers.
Does the census legislation limit the count to citizens or to anybody, any people in the country? Do you know?
Only citizens. That's what the government, that's what Steve Miller is proposing.
Yeah, but the current census, this is Linda Daniel, the current census is counting the peoples of the country, the residents of the country. The citizenship question was struck down by the court, so it is not in the current census. And I would suggest that we take the word citizens out of this statement number 8 and put all residents or all peoples.
Ah, thank you. Well, my impression is the legislation does not just confine the count to citizens. Other people may have a different understanding of the legislation.
This is Ann McCarley, and I was just going to respond. I think it was Sharon who said something about the Dreamers. Where are they going to get the money to become citizens? Dreamers do not have the right to become citizens because they entered the country illegally. And therefore, that's the whole problem with the Dreamers. They will never be able to apply for citizenship unless the law changes because of their illegal status.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Yeah, I think that's a matter of the law changing. Any other comments about this one?
Harvey, this is Steve. I'll just make the note that this is such a big topic and current topic that we're going to have an hour class on it. And one of our ladies that's on our call here, Linda Daniel, has recommended an immigration attorney in Denver that really specializes in this, and she'll be our guest and describe how tough it is for people to become citizens now and all they have to deal with.
Excellent.
So we're going to wade into this as soon as we can get her schedule.
Excellent. Well, that's another reason I admire, Steve, what the class is doing with your leadership. Thank you. Well, number 9, as much as possible, politics should be insulated from, there are a lot of assumptions in here, from the corrupting influence of concentrated wealth. As much as possible, politics should be insulated from the corrupting influence of concentrated wealth. What do you think?
Amen.
This is Riggs Osborne. My question would be, how would you move towards that, given basically the fact that, you know, it's so ingrained in our society and in terms of politics?
Great question, Rick.
This is Terry Twilliger, and that's going to be a real tough problem to solve because the Supreme Court ruled not too long ago that everybody can spend as much money as they want in politics. And so you're going to have to get the Supreme Court to change that. I don't think that will happen in the near future.
We're talking strategy and tactics again. I'd like to go back and welcome, Riggs. I didn't see you on the call. It's good to see you. Is this a value that you think has constitutional and scriptural bases, that as much as possible, I'm going to rephrase it, elections should not be able to be bought?
This is Ann Wormley, and an example of this was some years ago, just for the Denver school board election. One lady had a lot of big backers. She was well known in the area. She had $500,000 or more, and her opponent only had like $150,000 to spend. And this isn't a paid position, you know, and still there was that, or maybe it was even more than that, but the discrepancy was unbelievable. And of course, the person with the most money got the position.
Are we in the position as a country of the winner is automatically the one who is best funded? Is that where we are? You think of any exceptions to that?
Might be this year.
Is this a value that we ought to aspire toward? That's the question. Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Sharon Burbank, yes.
Okay.
This is Sharon Burbank again. I was just thinking about all the lobbyists and how much money they influence what happens in our government. I mean, that should be a system that should be gone as far as I can tell, but it's not going to go away.
And that's probably a whole other principle that we ought to talk about.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. Absolutely. That'd be a future discussion topic, Steve. Let's look at thank you for, these are wonderful contributions. Thank you. Let's look at number 10. And then Steve and I have already talked about, well, maybe there are some other principles that ought to be added here for us to have dialogue about. The basic constitutional covenant is still necessary and should be respected. Majority rule that respects minority rights. Sidebar, in the affirmation of faith that Judy and I, along with all of you, probably participated in at 9 o'clock, we talked about having respect and compassion for every person. 3 branches of government that check and balance each other. There's a whole other topic. And an appropriate balance between the public good and individual freedom. Wow. What do you think about that?
Harvey, this is Cynthia Reiners.
Yes.
I think that compared to the time that the Constitution was ratified, the issue of the appropriate balance between the states and the federal government should be debated and clarified.
Okay. So we need to revisit that balance, you're saying?
Yes, and understanding that from the very first Continental Congress to the Constitution's drafting, there was tremendous conflict between those. And then through the whole era of leading up to the Civil War, states' rights versus federal government was a huge issue also.
Yes.
And we see it today, back to where we were talking about voting. If you're having a national election, should there not be national standards? So we are not being held hostage by the hanging chads of Florida.
Yes, thank you. Why was there a need for a constitutional convention? Weren't the Articles of Confederation working all right? And if not, why not? To see what history we know. See what you remember from your 9th grade civics class. The Articles of Confederation were too loose an arrangement. The federal government had no power, as I recall reading. Weak federal government. Inability to tax, as I recall. Any other contributions about that? What about the 3 branches of government that check and balance each other? How is that supposed to work?
Well, it's supposed to work.
Tell us.
Well, I'm thinking about this past year and our Congress, our Senate, just has not stepped up to the plate. And our presidency over time has developed more and more power, and Congress has spent too much time split between the parties to really do their job.
Thank you. My reading says that the whole issue of executive power, presidential power, has been an expanding one in the past 60 years. since I majored in history at our university. And how does the Constitution handle right now the power and authority of the executive branch? Are there any limits according to the Constitution?
Harvey, this is Steve. I'm just trying to remember what I learned in school. If the Constitution does give the Supreme Court the exact power that it has today, because obviously it seems like Supreme Court decisions are the highest law of the land over the executive branch and the Congress. Those 9 judges decide what we're going to do, and nobody challenges them once the decision is made, it seems to me, and that's a good thing. It's served us so well, and that we have a consensus that we will follow what the Supreme Court does, including the president, that it's a great procedure. It's a great system.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Harvey,
how are the checks and balances supposed to work, and especially in regard to the executive branch?
Yeah, Harvey, this is Jerry Butler. You know, it's interesting with the Supreme Court.
Jerry, good to see you.
Good to see you. Because, you know, the Supreme Court doesn't make any law. It works on a system of jurisprudence, right? And so I think, Steve, you're right. I think in a way that when those cases are decided, that they set a certain precedent. But I think the beautiful thing about it is in a system of jurisprudence that even those precedents can be challenged. And I think that's the key, you know, is that as cultural norms change, and as our environment changes, as our needs change, as certain things that we couldn't see coming come to fruition, such as COVID-19, you know, those precedents can be challenged. And I think that that's what makes the Supreme Court beautiful, dangerous, and extremely powerful. Because you're right, once those cases are decided, it sets, you know, a pretty hard stone in the river, and that stone is hard to overturn. And that's, you know, I think where we have to be most mindful about the presidents that we select, because the legacy that they leave is usually realized in their Supreme Court selections and the way that court goes. But yeah.
Thank you, Jerry. We're so glad you're on the St. Andrew team.
Thank you.
Yes,
I'm
please.
going to jump in to Judy Martz to follow up on Jerry's comment. If Congress could get itself together in both houses, then they could pass a law in opposition to something Supreme Court had, because they can pass laws that might go right back to the Supreme Court and require new consideration. But part of our stymie now, and I think part of why so many of us worry about who's on the Supreme Court and any deaths that may occur, is because Congress doesn't seem to be able to function as effectively as the framers might have expected.
Why do we have a system of checks and balances so that there's a accountability among these 3 branches of government? I think there's a theological reason for that. And if you heard my sermon of April 26th, you get insight already. Why do we have checks and balances?
Well, I think, Harvey, Gene Dawson again, is to protect the minority and to make certain, because of the frailties of human nature, that oppression is kept to a minimum, or at least to prevent such from occurring.
Thank you. Other ideas about that? Particularly female contributor?
This is Susan Sandoz. I thought that no one was supposed to have unilateral power in the government, including the president. Was I misled somewhere in my education that was why we did have checks and balances?
Okay.
I'm nervous. I'm more nervous than anything with even Ron spoke a few weeks ago about the EPA and the president having undoing and removing certain EPA prior things or things that had been in that we have been counting on as far as climate, et cetera, 65 or more, and Ron can address that, but it seems like all our agencies are being dismantled, and I guess I think it's power run amok with no checks and balances, and that doesn't have to do with laws necessarily, but no other man can hold him accountable, no other person that we have elected. Thank you.
Thank you. And how is the system supposed to work to prevent abuses of power and to prevent us to becoming an authoritarian country? How's it supposed to work?
Harvey,
this is Steve. Just a quick comment. As I remember history class, it said the founders did not want to repeat the King George of England having complete power, so they decided to do the 3 branches of government with diverse power.
Yes.
This is Briggs Osborne. The whole impeachment process would be one aspect of controlling, the executive part of the government, but that didn't work this time.
The executive branch is accountable to Congress. And the method, as I understand the Constitution, where there are perceived evidences of abuse or undermining the Constitution, the supervising body is first the House of Representatives and then the Senate. The theological reason, it seems to me, is from 20th century theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who said, it is justice makes man's capacity or human capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but human capacity for injustice, somebody referred to that already, makes democracy necessary, meaning checks and balances are necessary. Any other comments about that? We could take a whole session on looking at all of the phrases in number 10, including the balance between the public good and individual freedom. Where are we seeing the public good, or as the preamble refers to it? We'll look at the preamble either in a moment or next week if you choose. The preamble calls that promoting the general welfare. How are we seeing that tension being lived out in America in the past 2 months? Common good versus individual freedom.
Masks.
Masks, face masks.
Exactly. This is a hot topic right now.
Yeah, Harvey.
Well, yeah.
This Tom Reiner is here. Just a quick question. You had a one statement in there, the protection of the minority. The particular genius of American-style democracy is, in fact, the protection of the minority. And in years past, it has always been, even though the government that I would wish would be in there didn't make it this time, I had no doubt that I could flywheel through this for 4 years and we'd come out the other side and make some corrections at that time. I never was concerned before with being in the minority myself. That was an important genius of the way we did democracy here in America. Now it sometimes feel like, and some of my other friends have heard me say this before, democracy can feel like 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what they're going to have for lunch. You have to be very careful not to do that.
You've given us the aphorism of the day, Tom. Bravo. Well, Steve and I talked about there might be a couple of things lacking in our list. And again, we could take a lot more time on number 10 at the different assumptions that are in this. What would you want us to have consensus on regarding the freedom of the press? Is that a value?
For
Thomas,
sure.
go ahead, please.
No, I just
Yes.
said here. I'm all
Here,
set.
here, the journalist says.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson said, before he became president, I think, if he were choosing between no government and having a press, or having a government with no free press, what would his choice be? Do you know? Having the press to hold people accountable. What about the rule of law? Another topic in current discussion, very pertinent right now. What is the rule of law in American system of government and in American history? What does that mean? Can anybody be above the law?
No.
The president can be above the law at this point, it seems like, but in answer to your question, nobody is supposed to be above the law.
Constitutionally, nobody's supposed to be above the law. Everybody's accountable because of what a couple of you have said about our tendency to grab all the power we can. And that was part of the concern named in the Declaration. What do you think about the rule of law? How are we doing it, holding on to it?
Not very well in the last few years.
Thank you. Other comments?
No, I mean, I think we're doing pretty well at following the rule of law. I think the problem is we've taken that principle and created a system and laws to nefarious ends. You know, we've created systems that subject people, and particularly people of color, and now we're forced to follow it. And I think that's a lot of what the call to justice is these days. You know, it's a call to say that these systems are corrupt and that these systems are biased and that these systems are hurting people, and we need to change them. But, you know, I guess I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I tend to believe in the rule of law. I tend to believe that law is necessary. I always found it interesting that the first thing God did with Moses was hand him a list of laws. and you know, because we need that. You know, I mean, we need laws to give shape to our ideals and to provide us with direction. And I think when they work well. But when they're created to, you know, hurt people, it can turn out really ugly. So that's just my thought.
Thank you, Jerry. It seems to me that the Constitution pretty quickly came to include the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments, which is supposed to guarantee rights for everyone, including minorities and those who are most vulnerable. Well, this has been a great discussion this morning. Again, my goal is to help us think about social ethics issues from a scriptural and theological perspective, and not from a predisposition that doesn't live up to the scriptural values we have agreed to use as our basis. In fact, one of the unique things that Reverend Mark has done, it seems to me, in people who are joining St. Andrew or having a child baptized, is there is a question about, do you promise to uphold the common good? Wow. I think we could take a whole other session unpacking that. I've told Steve I'm available if you choose as a group to continue a discussion on the preamble next week. And then Dr. Jim Forbes, retired pastor from Riverside Church in New York City, now I came up with a list of social justice principles based in scripture. And I think, as Steve has sent you a copy of that, I've been doing reading about this for the past 40 years. In my ministry, the relationship between American history. Yeah, thank you, Steve, for putting that on the.
Welcome.
There's some carryover between what we've been talking about and Dr. Forbes' principles. We could take time to look at those next week. We could take time to unpack the preamble, which parts I think are just being forgotten right now. The reading I've been doing have included, if I could make some book recommendations, The Idea of America. I'll send you a bibliography of all this if you'd like. A little paperback on tyranny by Timothy Snyder, who is a professor of history at Yale. A book that's been out about 18 months now called The Death of Truth. How important is it to be able to trust each other in American society for being truthful in a time when Michael Bloomberg says a couple of years ago, we are living in an epidemic of untruth. A book by Stephen Levitsky entitled How Democracies Die. The Soul of America by historian John Meacham. I won't hold it up for you. One of my favorite historians, along with Dolores Kearns Goodwin. David Brooks' book on the death of The Road to Character. Book by E.J. Dionne, who is an active Catholic and political analyst, Our Divided Political Heart. Then I've just started a book on authoritarianism in America called Can It Happen Here? And the constitutional law professor at Yale, Jack Balkin, says we are in a time right now in our country of constitutional rot, R-O-T, rot. So, Steve, you're in control now. What do you want to do?
Harvey, Gene Dawson, just a quick one here. Would you add to your list Ben Sass's book, Them, very popular, the senator from Nebraska?
Excellent, thank you.
And another principle, maybe your next session with us. For a democracy to work, it requires personal responsibility. Can you touch on that next time around?
Thank you, Gene. Thank you.
Harvey, this is Cynthia Reiners again. Could I also suggest Anti-Intellectualism in America, Richard Hofstadter in the 1950s, as we see all of these debates that don't accept science as factual, it seems to have a very, very long course in American history and the character.
Thank you. Please write me, HMARTZ at me.com, hmartz at me.com, and give me those titles and authors, and I'll put together a bibliography. Group, what would you like to do? Do you want to continue a third Sunday on this, or do you want to, with Steve's leadership, move on to the next topic?
Harvey, my impression is that there's still a lot of interest in doing this. Let's go ahead and continue next week. You've got a great discussion going, reminding us of our history and our political science classes. So let's go ahead and do it next week. We've got 30 people on today, probably 35 actually. So good interest and turnout. We appreciate you taking time, and great topics.
Good to be with you. Please reflect. I'm happy to do that. This is fun for me. Please reflect on your theological and biblical values that you're trying to bring to this discussion, that we're not just trying to do it off the top of our heads, but as followers of Christ.
Right.
Thank you, Steve. Bravo.
Thank you, Harvey and Judy, for being with us, and everybody for joining us. We will see you next week. Take care.